There's been lots of very good information published over the years. This is a publication was put out 40 years ago. The editor was Dr. Bentley, and it was put out by Alberta Agriculture in Canada and the University of Alberta. So lots of very, very good information have come from some of these long-term rotation plots. So comment number 6 from me then is long-term crop rotation studies are absolutely invaluable. And early forward-thinking soil scientists established these crop rotation studies, and the lessons that we've learned from these long-term crop rotation studies have not only benefited soil scientists, but they've been very helpful to farmers to adapt much more sustainable cropping systems and soil management practices. And it's certainly my hope that in the long-term cropping system studies will continue and perhaps even expand, although with the way the Alberta government goes, God only knows where we're going to go in terms of funding for agriculture, but hopefully we can even see long-term rotation studies expanding to learn more. One of the things that these long-term rotation studies really pointed to was the benefits of fertilizer. And really in the last 50 years, fertilizers have really played an increasing role in terms of not only increasing crop production, but the benefit of improving soil fertility and soil quality. So by applying fertilizer, we're replacing nutrients removed from the soil. We're increasing economic crop production, so the farmers are producing more, so it's more economic for them. And really from our standpoint, it's having the advantage of actually building soil organic matter and improving soil quality. So I just wanted to recognize a few people, and I started picking up one or two, and I realized there's about 100 people we should really be talking about. But the late John Harapiak, Doug Penny when he was with Alberta Agriculture, Len Krasnowski, a fellow I get to work with, is Eric Bremer, Marvin Wagner of the University of Alberta, Ruiz Caramanis with Viterra. There's a number of people I didn't have pictures of. Jim Robertson with the university, Elson Solberg with Molly, the late Gary Coy, Dan Heaney, Dan Laverty. There are many, many people who've been involved in doing soil fertility research across Alberta over the years. And so basically in every soil zone across Alberta, we've been doing fertilizer research with cereals, oilseeds, pulses, forages, and various types of special crops, looking at nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, and various micronutrients. So there's been a lot of work done over the years. And the next thing I'd just like to point out is collectively there's been a lot of work done. And Len Krasnowski, who I've had the opportunity to work with over the years, actually took a lot of that information, that excellent information, that database, and put it into a program called AFIRM, which stands for Alberta Farm Fertilizer Information Recommendation Manager. So now farmers actually have the opportunity, when they soil sample, they can go to this program and input their soil test results for the various depths, for the various nutrients, input the crop that they plan to grow, the value of that crop in terms of the value per bushel, and then they can input their fertilizer prices, and based on fertilizer response curves, can actually come up with some projections in terms of yield and an economic benefit of that fertilizer, and the program will actually give some general recommendations for nutrients like phosphorus and potassium and sulfur as well. So it's an excellent program that really has come from all of the fertilizer work that's been done. So comment number 7, in 2011, Alberta farmers spent $700 million on fertilizer. Unfortunately, we spend a very, very, very small percent of that continuing to do fertilizer research. There's a very little fertilizer research ongoing presently by Alberta Agriculture at Canada, and really industry does almost no fertilizer research anymore. But fertilizer really has become essential for annual and perennial crop production. And from my standpoint, well-managed fertilizer use has not only improved profitability of Alberta's farms, but it's really gone a long ways over the last 30 to 40 years to help build soil quality. And as technology continues, we're seeing things like variable rate fertilizer technology, and really all that is the application of different rates of fertilizer on uniquely different soil areas within the same field. And certainly the purpose then would be to try and optimize fertilizer inputs with the yield potential of different soil areas within a field. So it's basically going back to the 4 R's, the right fertilizer source at the right time, the right place, and at the right rate. And really that involves is actually putting together a preset prescription fertilizer map as to where the farmers put on more fertilizer or less fertilizer to achieve crop production. However, I thought the one thing I'd like to point out is there tends to be at times a real clash between scientific knowledge and the promotion and marketing of various technologies. And variable fertilizer technology is an excellent example where many people are trying, I shouldn't say many, but some companies are promoting that to farmers far beyond its true significance and make much greater claims than what's really realistic. Or in terms of the need for micronutrient fertilizers, there are more micronutrient fertilizers around than you can shake a stick at, and other specialty fertilizers with great claims with very little substance to really back up what they support. So some of these people are really riding on the shirt tail, or the coattails of good science to try to promote their own products or technologies. So the next comment I just really want to make, sadly, the need for specialty fertilizers and new technology like variable rate fertilizer technology has really been overemphasized by some agronomists. And as an example, variable rate technologies to apply fertilizer or micronutrient fertilizers are just examples of products or technologies being promoted to farmers well beyond their true significance. And that really annoys me, and what we will do, we can do. Some of them, these people are even professional agrologists, and so what can you do about it? But that's another comment for another day. So I was talking about soil conservation, and now what I'd like to do is actually kind of go back, and I mentioned the work that was done in the 1930s and 1940s, but it didn't really end there. It actually continued, and as this is an example, there was a fellow by the name of Tracy Anderson. He's an agricultural engineer at the Lethbridge Research Station that worked in the 1960s, and he was conducting direct seeding work at Lethbridge well before anybody else was even thinking about doing that kind of thing. He retired in the 1970s, and a young scientist by the name of Dr. Windmill took over in the mid-70s to lead the no-till cropping research from 1970s through to the 1990s, and he kind of really picked up and led the research charge in terms of direct seeding. That's just a picture away that I got from Ag Canada, probably taken in the early 1980s when he was in the earlier part of his career. And really the goal of direct seeding is just to, when you seed, to disturb as little of that soil surface as possible, leave as much of a mulch layer as you possibly can, and leave as much stubble as standing as possible. So you're disturbing the soil as little as possible in a one-pass system when you seed and fertilize. That's the only time the soil would actually need to be disturbed is with that direct seeder. And in the 1970s and 80s, there was very limited equipment, so the engineers really had to work to develop equipment that would actually be capable of direct seeding, but that actually took place. But the next step was then to convince farmers to do that, and that was a real challenge. But again, we're fortunate for farmers like Manure, who just farms east of Lethbridge, who's retired now and his son has taken over, or Gordon Hilton, who farmed east of Strathmore, his sons have taken over his farm. They were the very early adapter farmers that started direct seeding in the very early 1980s. And with there's a number of people, Rob Dunn, for example, worked promoting direct seeding. There was agencies like reduced tillage linkages that really promoted the direct seeding concept. So we really started to see widespread adoption in the 1990s as equipment manufacturers developed and improved their seeding equipment. And the thing is, direct seeding is not just a case of seeding, it's really a whole philosophy or a farming system. So you have to have the equipment to do the direct seeding, but it involves a completely different management system with weed control, doing pre-burn down and weed control before you seed and after you seed, and then even at harvest management, how you manage that straw for the next year so you can go back in and direct seed. So it was a real change in mindset in terms of seeding. But we stop and think that we really didn't start until about 1980, and here we are 33 years later. But if we look today, about 60% of Alberta's annual crops are actually direct seeded in Alberta. And even the lands that aren't direct seeded, most of Alberta's agricultural lands that are cultivated are in a reduced tillage situation. So the benefits of reduced tillage are direct seeding, improved organic matter levels and soil quality, improved organic matter levels. That's really increased the mineralization potential of organic matter to release nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. So farmers might actually eventually not have to put as much fertilizer on as what we have been in the past. Other benefits, we still have even better residue cover on the soil to prevent the wind and water erosion. And when we have that protective mulch layer, we have less evaporation. We're not tilling the soil to lose moisture. So we have more moisture, which has allowed greater crop diversification. With more moisture, that means farmers that have been able to reduce their summer fallow. And probably in the last 20 years, across southern and central Alberta, we've seen about a 70% reduction in summer fallow, about a threefold increase in canola production, about a tenfold increase in pulse crop production. So this crop diversification has been very good for farmers. It reduces their production risk, it increases their farm income, but from my standpoint, or our standpoint, it leads to improved soil health as well. So comment number 9 then, prairie farmers have really excelled in the adoption of direct seeding technology in the last 30 years, which has led to improved soil quality and also improved crop production. So now we'll start to move back to maybe some more negative things. I actually took this picture east of Highway 2. If you know where the Ellerslie Road is, there used to be an elevator just before you got to Edmonton called Ellerslie. And if you went west, you'd go to the University of Alberta farm. And in this particular case, I was driving east on the Ellerslie Road about 5 years ago. And this is actually the black soil zone, but you wouldn't know it. All of the topsoil has been stripped off, and the only thing left in that half section is a nice looking hip-proof barn, but it didn't last much longer. My big concern here is just to point out the loss of agricultural land. There's land fragmentation, rural development, and urban expansion. In this particular case, another half section of land was being cleared for so-called development or expansion of Edmonton into some of what I consider some of our best agricultural lands that could potentially be used for food production. Here's just a picture of, or a map showing southern Alberta, showing just a residential footprint. Each one of these black dots represents a country residential acreage, and we've seen a huge influx into the agricultural areas of country residential homes, and as a result, taking more and more land out of production. And I don't want people from Calgary thinking I'm going to pick on them, but I am. But it's really no different for Edmonton or any other place we might happen to live in Alberta. And this is just some work that was done by Brad Stelfox. And in 2005, Calgary was at about 900 million people. Since then, Calgary's grown to be about 1.1 million people. And if you look, he's actually projected Calgary's growth at 2, 2.5, and 3%. And Calgary really has been growing between 3 and 4.5% per year. If you look at Calgary's growth for the next 37 years to 2050, Calgary could actually be at a population of around 3.7 million people. And that's fine, but what does that actually do to the actual land area that they occupy? Well, it was about just under 500 square kilometers a few years ago. Presently, Calgary is at about 600 square kilometers. That's how much land Calgary occupies, 600 square kilometers. And if their growth continues at 3% per year, which it has been in the past or higher, that means Calgary in another 37 years will occupy an area of 1,800 square kilometers. So that's the good news. But so it occupies an area of 600 square kilometers now, but Calgary is often growing at a rate of 4.5%. If Calgary continues to grow at a rate of 4.5%, their land area between now and 2050, that means Calgary will actually occupy an area of 3,800 square kilometers, which is actually crazy. A lot of people don't believe it, but that is that potential. And this just shows a map that Brad Stelfox put together, showing Calgary at its present size, and if it grows at 4.5%, to 2050, that's the area it will actually occupy. So here's High River, here was Okotoks, here was Airdrie, and Carstairs better get scared, and there's Cochrane. Basically, the entire MD of Rocky would be occupied, much of the MD of Foothills, and then expanding into the county of wheatland. So then if we look at the map of southern Alberta, where our best Class 2 lands are, and here's Calgary, well, what's going to happen if Calgary does grow at that rate, and what's going to happen for Class 2 lands? Well, that's where Calgary will occupy in another 37 years our very best agricultural lands in southern Alberta. Most of it will be under pavement and under parks, so not very productive. So my comment number 10 then, urban sprawl and land fragmentation are really resulting in the loss of Alberta's best agricultural lands, and not even our best agricultural lands. We have to be concerned about our most fragile lands. We look at the brown soil zone, where oil wells and gas wells are going in. We have more species at risk in the brown soil zone than any other area of Alberta waste. So we have to be concerned about land fragmentation. And really, society must really get much more serious about protecting our lands for future generations. A lot of times people say, well, that's not really possible, but when I get serious, I'm talking when I was a kid. I can remember in the mid-1960s when my family would drive to Calgary. We knew we were getting close to Calgary because the Chinook Mall was at the very south end of Calgary. And there was nothing south of the Chinook Centre or the Chinook Mall. And now, when you're in Calgary, when you get to the Chinook Mall, you know, oh, finally, we're getting close to downtown. So it's been a real change in the last 40 years. Now, I don't want people to think that I was just picking on Edmonton or Calgary. Today I want to kind of pick on everybody, so I'm going to pick on the oil and gas sector. But in all seriousness, Alberta is very fortunate to have very significant hydrocarbon reserves. And oil and gas wells are a common sight across Alberta. But the bad news is we have a lot of abandoned oil and gas wells. We probably have something in the order of 800,000 oil and gas wells have been drilled in Alberta. And this just shows the massive increase. These are abandoned wells across Alberta. And when we look at the impact of pipelines, a massive number of pipelines have been built that crisscross all areas of Alberta, including our agricultural lands. So the point that I just really want to make is there's been extensive amounts of land that have been negatively affected by the oil and gas well drilling programs. construction of access roads and installation of pipelines. Presently, we have about over 120,000 well sites that have been abandoned agricultural lands. We have about 110,000 kilometers of pipelines that are installed on agricultural lands. And often these soils are never reclaimed back to the point where they're just as productive as they were before them. In fact, it's almost impossible to reclaim them back to that level. And so frequently see pipelines continuing to go in, and the Alberta government is constantly whining and bellyaching. They want to build more pipelines to the states, and I kind of shake my head sometimes. But the end result is when pipelines are built across good agricultural land, this is the effect. On the right-hand side is the normal crop growth. On the left side of these stakes is where a pipeline was actually put in about 10 years before, and the farmer was kind of complaining. But this was east of Strathmore. I don't do farm calls. You know, occasionally when I'm out to work in different areas, farmers show me things. So that's where the pipeline is here on this quarter section. You can even see where the pipeline was. This is a half a mile away from when I took the picture. And that's a mile away from when I took the picture. So when you can see a mile away the negative effects on crop growth, you know it's actually quite devastating. So young farmers often complain about this kind of thing, where this young fellow standing, the crop is normal, and this area here is the pipeline right away. And probably I would estimate crop growth there would be about 40% of its potential. We've lost 60% of the yield of that crop. And this pipeline went in 9 years before it took this particular picture. And we can't get things back to where they were. So comment number 11, drilling sites and pipelines have and continue to disturb considerable land areas across Alberta. And so I'm going to take the chicken way out and just actually ask a question now. Should drilling sites and pipelines have greater restrictions on the amount of land that is disturbed in the various regions across Alberta? And should drilling sites and pipelines have greater land reclamation standards? Presently, Alberta Environment requires land to be reclaimed back to 80% of the production potential. That's the requirement, but very rarely does this happen. And often in my travels, it seems like it's more like about they're reclaimed at 40 or 50% of their production potential. So now I'll just have a quick look at electrical transmission lines. And again, these take lands out of production. And if they don't take lands out of production, they certainly cause challenges for farmers in terms of their soils and land management. So just a comment that I'll make here. Should there be restrictions or limitations on electrical transmission lines, windmill sites, and other types of industries to preserve our agricultural lands and protect our sensitive lands? And so now we're kind of getting towards the end, but I did want to make sure that people recognize I'm not just picking on other types of industries. I want to look internally at our own agricultural sector as well. And probably one of my greatest concerns is the intensive livestock industry. This just shows Southern Alberta, and each of the dots represents an intensive livestock operation. And you can look at just north of Lethbridge, and it's everywhere in the province. You go to the county of Lacombe, they have issues as well. But just north of Lethbridge, there's a real predominance of feedlots. And that really causes us various challenges. And this just shows that when we apply manure based on crop removal of nitrogen, put on manure, and that's the way the Alberta government actually recommends it. You put on manure based on nitrogen, and you match the crop removal to nitrogen. But when you do that, this is the crop removal of phosphorus, but this is how much phosphorus we put on. This is how much potassium is removed, but this is how much potassium we actually apply. So, and this goes right back to my own department. Absolute foolishness for years, and we recognized this 20 years ago, but we recommend that farmers put manure on based on nitrogen, and all the land requirements that the farmers have to meet the over requirements is based on nitrogen, which is absolute stupidity. I know there's at least one guy here from the NRCB, so you might see him take me around the corner and explain things to me in a few minutes. But I can run faster than him. So. But there's been some great work done by various people, and this is some work that was done by Barry Olson and company looking at coarse textured and fine textured soils where manure was actually applied for 8 years. This was actually the Pitcher Butte area. This was just the work on the coarse textured soils. Manure was applied, that was the control, and the manure was applied from 20 to 120 metric tons per hectare every year for 8 years. This is how much phosphorus was left in the soil after 8 years, about 900 kilograms per hectare in a 0 to 15 centimeter depth. And there was another 200 in the 15 to 30 centimeter depth. People always say phosphorus doesn't move. Well, if you load it up and it starts moving downward in sandy soils, that's exactly what's going to happen. It's going to move downward. And so there's over 1,100 kilograms per hectare of phosphorus after 8 years of application. And many farmers tend to put manure on every second or third year at rates at this level, which is about 60 tons per acre. Most farmers put it on between 40 and 60 tons, usually every second or third year. but the reality is after 30 or 40 years, we have some major problems that we tend to be ignoring. And some of the implications of agricultural land management practice then will contribute to eutrophication of our surface water, and as a result, there's no wonder we are concerned about our surface water quality. So when we have feedlots and in intensive livestock operations, even livestock raising, we do have to be concerned about ultimately manure management. So the last comment I'm going to make is really manure should be applied at agronomic rates based on phosphorus content and the proper tire requirements. So we've known this for 20 years. We just don't have, our department didn't have the guts to do it. Oh, and by the way, I did resign my position a while ago, so I can say, pretty much say whatever I want now. They can't even lay me off because I'm going to quit. But we should really have limits on soil phosphorus levels to ensure responsible nutrient management. We can talk about it, but really we have to have stop signs, we have to have speed limits, and to ensure that producers maintain phosphorus levels at a reasonable number. And even the most liberal state in the U.S. has a limit of 400 pounds per acre of phosphorus in the top 6 inches. And if the most liberal state the most liberal redneck state in the U.S. can have phosphorus limits, surely maybe Alberta should be thinking about it. So to wrap up then, I don't look at oil and gas as our most important natural resources in Alberta. I really look at soil and water as our most important resources, and these are sustainable natural resources. And soil, we need it for biodiversity. 2/3 of our land in Alberta is still a native vegetation, and we want to maintain those native plants and animals. And a third of our land, or roughly a third of our land, is used for food production, and the soils and those agricultural lands we need to produce food to sustain human life. And from the human standpoint then, almost all the food we eat is either grown or raised on our land, and unfortunately, land is taken for granted by our rapidly expanding urban population. They don't appreciate where our food really comes from. So unfortunately, there's just a real disconnect between our abundant food supply and the importance of our land and our soil to actually produce food. So summary then, kind of the 2 key points. Soil and crop scientists, leading edge farmers have really made great strides to conserve and improve soil management and soil quality since the lands were broken about 80 to 100 years ago across Alberta. But soil scientists and farmers need continuing support. The federal government and provincial government are basically ignoring agricultural research from my standpoint, and it really needs to have a much greater focus. And from a society standpoint, we must pay much greater attention to potential land degradation of soil and loss of agricultural land. Because in the future, the future generation are going to need land to produce crops for food that are going to need to use as our fuels, our non-renewable resource fuels are lost or used up or sold at bargain basement prices to the U.S. We're going to need crops to produce biofuels, we're going to need crops to produce fibers, and these are all going to be the other necessities of life. So in conclusion, we must make every effort to conserve our soil and preserve our land. I thought I'd just finish off with this slide, kind of something that's more sustainable livestock grazing on native grassland.